using this proportion. Remember, is over of equals what?
Percent over 100.
Percent over 100. Okay. So let's look at these questions here in this exercise. It says, let's see, we did some of them yesterday, but I doubt if you just memorized them, so it doesn't matter. Let's look at number 1 first. 25% of 80. So using this, they gave us the percent, right? 25. We know it's always over 100. And they said what? Of 80. There's your of. See what I mean? So that's where the 80 goes, where the of goes. Now, how are we going to do that now?
Multiply.
Multiply what?
25 times 80.
25 times 80. And then what are we going to do next?
Divide by 100.
Divide by 100. And how are we going to divide that by 100?
Just move the decimal 2 times to the
Move the decimal 2 places to the left. And our answer is
20.
20. Now, there are other ways to find 25% of 80. Some people learn to multiply, to change the 25% to a decimal and then multiply times 80. That's valid if you can do it. But you can't find the part by doing that. You can't find the percent by doing that. So that's why I don't teach all of those different ways to find it. Because this one way works for any of them. Doesn't make sense to learn 3 different ways to do it. But I say that because if some of you have learned that way, it's still valid. I use it sometimes quickly myself. But sometimes, like I said, it doesn't work to find all 3 of them. And sometimes you're going to be looking for the part, sometimes you're going to be looking for the whole, sometimes you're going to be looking for the percent. And you don't need to learn a way to do each one of these when you can use this one way to do them all. Okay? And it doesn't matter what the number is. People get used to doing that, then they get to ones like number 4, says 4.5% of 400. Somebody said, well, how do you do that? No different. They gave you the percent. What is the percent?
4.5.
4.5. You put it there. It's always over 100. And it says of what?
400.
Of 400. There's your of. Doesn't matter what the numbers are. Now, you just have to know how to multiply decimals. Because we know we're going to multiply these 2 and there's a decimal there. But you're not going to do it any differently just because it's a decimal. We're going to see here in a minute you're not going to do it any differently if it's a fraction. You still follow the same process. The process doesn't change just because it's a different type of number. So I'm going to multiply 400 times 4.5. So I'll follow the rules of multiplying decimals, because that's what I'm doing right now. And when you multiply decimals, it says that you multiply the numbers as if there's no decimal there. Then when you get to your answer, what do? You count the number of decimal places you have in the problem, and how many do we have? 1, so I have to have 1 decimal place in my answer. So my answer is 1,800. That's what 400 times 4.5 is. Now, what do I have to do? Divide it by 100. And how am I going to do that? Move the decimal back 2 places. 18. So this says that 18 is, you see, that's the is. 18 is 4.5% of 400. That's what this math, these numbers tell us. Okay? Number 5 says 37.5% of 240. So what is the percent? 37.5. Same thing. Still, the percent goes over 100. And it says of what?
240.
Of 240. Same thing. No different in how we do it. But now we're gonna have to multiply 240 times 37.5. So you have to follow the rules of multiplying fractions. And the first step is to do what?
Change.
First step, we don't have a problem here yet. How we're gonna write it? When you multiply fractions, how do you write it? Do you write them up and down? Not for multiplying. Adding and subtracting, you write them vertically. Those are things you gotta memorize. You gotta memorize it, because as soon as you see it, you can't stop and think about how to do it. That's when fractions become hard. You don't stop and think about if it said 24 times 2. You would have just gone on it because you know how to set. Do you set it up across? No. You've done it enough times that you know you set your multiplication problems up vertically for whole numbers. The same thing you have to be able to go to right straight when you see a fraction or a decimal. Has to just be there. How do you do it? You write the problem horizontally. Next step you were going to say?
Change mixed numbers.
And whole numbers into improper fractions. You have to change all whole numbers, and you change whole numbers into an improper fraction just by sticking a 1 under it. Mixed numbers you change to an improper fraction by saying you have a half here, you want them all to be halves. If you have a fraction, whatever it is here, you want them all to be cut into that. I want them all to be halves. Right now I have 37 wholes and 1 half. I got to cut them all up into halves. If I had 37 whole things and I cut each one of those in half, I'd have 74 halves over here, because you have 2 halves for every whole, right? 2 times 37. I'd have 2 37 times. 74 wholes, 74 halves in 37 wholes, plus the half I already have here. So I'd have 75 halves. Then the next rule says to multiply top times top, bottom times bottom. If you know how to cancel, this would be a time to do that to make this number smaller. I would say 2 goes into 2, and 2 goes into 240. Then I'd multiply my top times top. Bottom times bottom. Simplify or reduce. Okay? If I could not cancel, I'd still multiply top times top. Bottom times bottom. Simplify it. You still get your 9,000. So don't worry about the canceling. If that confused you, just leave it alone. You never have to cancel. It just makes it easier sometimes to do that, because the number then is smaller. Especially if you can get it down to a 1 down here, because then you know whatever the top is, that's your answer. But if you can't, it wasn't hard to know 2 goes into 18,000, 9,000 times. So now you have to remember, though, that's just this times this. That's not your answer. So I know now that 100 times something's got to give me 9,002. And so we have to, like you said before, divide it by 100. And Robert, what'd you say how we do that?
Move decimal over twice to the left.
And that's your answer. So 90 is 37.5% of 240. So this is your is, this is your of, and that's your percent. Okay? So it doesn't matter if it's a decimal or if it's a fraction. You still set it up the same way. You just have to then know how to do that. Either multiply by it or divide by it, depending on what the case shall be. Let's look at page 160. 960. Exercise 9 says 9 is what percent of 36? So they said 9 is, where does the is go? So now they gave us the is. 9 is, and then it says what percent? So I'm looking for the percent, right? Of 36. There's your of. You see? Put it just right where. That's how come you have to know is of, where the is goes, where the of goes, where the percent goes, because it's going to give you the words. You just have to put them in the right place. So now I'm looking for the percent, but you see I set it up the same way. I just put the numbers where they needed to go. Now, you have these two equals these two. These are the two that I have, so I'm going to multiply those. And 9 times 100 is what? 900. So I know that something times 36 has to give me 900 too. So just like you had to divide by the 100, this time you have to divide by the 36.